Hail, sons of destiny, sing the song of praise, all glorious, proclaim it proudly, shout it loudly, magnify thy name.
Born on October 28, 1913, Paul Jones would wear many hats throughout his life. To his family, he was a loving husband and father. Professionally, he was an award-winning journalist, author, and university professor. He was a Navy man and a veteran of World War II. He was known for being active in his church, a noted historian and genealogist, and as a local leader with many organizations ranging from the Kiwanis and the Wood County Interfraternity Club to the UPI Editors Association of Ohio. But to the Phi Gams of the Delta Colony and Beta Gamma chapter, our first impression of Paul wasn't that of a man who could wear many hats, but as the graduate brother in the bow tie.
I think the first thing I can remember, of course, when I moved here in 1970, so in that time there wasn't much to talk about, and of course I had not met Paul Jones at that time, but when they started getting ready, the alumni were all in this area, was all sent a notice, and I forget where it is. It come to some place. I think we met in the student union, and we had a pretty good representation, and there was the National was here, and getting help, and so guiding us back on the thing. So, but that's how we got started, and that of course the Niebaum and probably everybody else that brought up the story about, Paul tried 41 years ahead of that. And that's, what can you say about that? Guy working 41 years and finally comes to tuition. Mm-hmm. So, I put in nomination for the Distinguished Fiji Award, the one man. He was the key guy. Of course, he knew everybody in town. He said in the paper, he had all the contacts. So, but he headed up, and we had a strong group. And I tried to find in my files all the names of those guys. And I don't have all the names.
Already in his late 60s, when Phi Gamma Delta finally arrived on campus in the spring of 1982, Paul looked more like a kindly grandfather type than a reason for a new fraternity to come to BGSU. A gentle smile and a kind word were his hallmark, cleverly masking the fact that Paul was really the Phi Gam version of the man behind the curtain. International had wanted to colonize at Bowling Green many years earlier. Fraternities were largely under attack on the East Coast and in the late 60s and 70s, resulting in many chapter closures, and Bowling Green was seen as a Greek-friendly environment by comparison. But new chapters don't just happen by accident. They need guidance. Bill Zerman, the executive director of the fraternity at the time, left the issue in the hands of the one brother he trusted to make the decision. That man was Paul Jones. And when Paul told Bill the time was right, the Delta colony of Phi Gamma Delta at Bowling Green State University was born. But Paul's Fiji pedigree began long, long ago in a place not so far away. Paul pledged Phi Gamma in 1933 at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio. He earned his degree in journalism in 1936 and then married his Fiji sweetheart in 1940. They moved to Bowling Green in 1941 and he began teaching in the journalism department, but that part of his life was interrupted by World War II. After the war, Paul came home to Bowling Green, the only home he would know for the next 63 years. He taught at the university until 1953, when he left to become editor of the Bowling Green Sentinel Tribune, a position he would hold until his retirement in 1980.
Paul was a very dedicated worker, and in his later years, he had excruciating pain that he lived through, primarily in his face. And I probably will mispronounce it, but I think it was called tic douloureux, and very little could be done for it, and yet basically he never missed work, and the rest of us might We might be sick if we have a minor pain or something like that. But that to me was always a good testament to Paul's dedication, not only to the paper, but to get the paper to the readers. I mean, you're committed to doing that job. And he was a stickler for detail. Very regimented and very much the point of fact was key for him. And that's the way it should be, really, for an editor. So I learned a lot about detail, a lot about double-checking facts.
Retirement gave Paul more time for his other pursuits, namely genealogy, local history, and the establishment of Phi Gamma Delta at Bowling Green. On the Phi Gam front, he cleared the hurdles with the university and worked with International in our early formation.
He clearly had a lot of sway with the university. So when there were issues that were problematic for us, he did a lot of behind the scenes calming the fears, because Phi Gamma Delta wasn't a known quantity at Bowling Green. Even though very strong international fraternity, quite honestly, Bowling Green was a little nervous about adding another fraternity they didn't know if they'd be able to control, because they didn't understand the strength of the graduate involvement, they didn't understand the strength of the international fraternity. So there was some of that as far as getting their support and IFC support in supporting our colony and the process that we go through, because I kind of got the sense that once the university saw us as another fraternity, they wanted us to be fully chartered because they thought there'd be more control by the international that way. So, but Paul went in and explained, along with Gary Heberlein, who was a provost at the time, what our process was, and they got comfortable with that. Like I said, Paul was one of those guys we went to, we didn't know how to run a committee. It's like, what do you do in Rush when a guy walks in the door? Right? I mean, we had the field secretaries, and we had a couple graduates from some other chapters, but by and large, we didn't know how to act like a fraternity.
We don't know. Maybe no one knows how much Paul influenced the college on our behalf. He had very, very good relations with the university administration, and I'm sure a few times he might have helped us behind the scenes that we might not even have known about.
Perhaps most importantly, he recruited local graduate brothers John Kretzchmar, Gary Heberlein, and Nelson Evans to form our original Board of Colony Advisors. Without this core of support, we would never have crossed the chasm from colony to chapter.
He talked about Phi Gamma a lot, and even after he was out of school, the fraternity meant a lot to Paul, I think. And then he helped here at Bowling Green establish the chapter here. And whenever the boys asked him to come over for something, he was right ready to go. But it was a major interest in his life.
Paul was very proud to have Phi Gamma Delta at Bowling Green, because he was exceptionally proud of his community of Bowling Green, and he was exceptionally proud of Phi Gamma Delta. And that was his driving force of why it was so important for him. I think it was more important for Paul than anybody else to get the chapter at Bowling Green. And that's how he ended up becoming our legate. He got the charter at our chartering from the national president. He was the person who, and I mean, it just beamed out of him when he was holding that, because he married two things that were really, really important to him.
Fittingly, when we did earn our charter in March 1984, standing at the podium to hand it to us was Paul Jones, our legate, our graduate-in-chief, and in a very real sense, the first BGFiji. After our chartering, Paul remained active with our undergraduate chapter in whatever capacity he was needed, and as his health allowed, until his death in 2005. The chapter room in the fraternity house is named in his honor. He is and always was the epitome of not for college days alone.
the spirit of the founders and in the spirit of the advisors that work with the founders, such as Paul. I encourage all the brothers to live their values, to be the best scholars they can be, to be the best Fijis they can be, to enjoy their fraternity experience, but to always strive for excellence in what they do and to live their lives as true Fiji gentlemen, so that anybody who looks at the chapter from on campus or from the community would be excited and proud that Phi Gamma Delta at Bowling Green is part of the campus community. I think in the spirit of Paul's legacy and that of John Kretzchmar and Gary and others that worked with the chapter at the very beginning, if you're a Fiji graduate and you live somewhere further away from Bowling Green, think about working with the chapter of Phi Gamma Delta that's nearest you, because after all you have to realize that we cannot colonize at any campus unless Fijis from other chapters who are already living in the vicinity will reach out and help a group of young men from a chapter not their own. And certainly that was one of Paul's greatest legacies, and it's an opportunity for those who joined the chapter in which he assisted to pass that along to another generation by working with someone else's chapter in the big world of Phi Gamma Delta.
Where we're sitting here, the room is something permanent, something you can see. It's something that it's nice to read about it in a book or magazine, but you know, you put your hands on it, you can touch it, and you know, and everybody that goes through this chapter now, and the alumni that come back, will see this room, and I think that's a good start. And I think also just try to emphasize with the new pledge classes, hey, keep up the grades, keep up the things that you know, friendship and knowledge, service, morality, excellence, all the things that Paul did so well. Say, hey, this is what he did. You know, when he taught here, you know, he's in journalism school here, and then at the editor of the paper. So we just got to, you know, we're fortunate to have him lead us to get us going. But you're right to do it. So I like something permanent, something you see, something you touch, and I think as long as we're here, this should be here.
For our international fraternity, now over 160 years old, Paul Jones is an icon who was an active part of our fraternity for nearly half of its history. Paul saw our fraternity come full circle from his days at Ohio Wesleyan, when fraternities were more like secret societies, to the Animal House days of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Paul would be happy to see that his fraternity, and particularly his adopted chapter, once again put brotherhood first as the reason to be a Phi Gam. For those of us who knew him personally, we owe him a debt of gratitude which can only be repaid to future Phi Gams. We can only hope to influence them in similar and inspiring ways. We are not the first group to honor Paul Jones, and undoubtedly we won't be the last. Paul was named the 1986 Outstanding Citizen of the Year by the Bowling Green Chamber of Commerce. In 1991, he was recognized with the Spirit of Wood County Award, and his legacy continues as his book, The History of Wood County, will soon be published posthumously. Paul Jones, who passed ad astra on May 31, 2005, is greatly missed and fondly remembered. Paul Willis Jones, forever our brother in the bow tie.
Phi Gamma Delta still to thee, our hearts will turn eternally.